In this video, I want to talk about the arteries and veins of the upper arm. And the nice thing about these is that they're really going to follow the names of the bones and the anatomical regions. So hopefully they won't be as intimidating as perhaps some of the other areas of the body we've studied. So I'm going to start at the origin of the blood. Once I get rid of the collarbones and the sternum, and we're looking at the aortic arch, remember that there is an asymmetry here. As we look at the right arm, the right has this brachiocephalic trunk that's going to send one branch up the carotid and one branch through the subclavian. Subclavian is going to go to the arm. The left goes straight to the subclavian. Remember, when you're looking at an anatomical model, they're looking at you, so their right is your left. Once we are looking at the subclavian, there are a couple branches off of that subclavian that are going to feed the thorax. So there's some branches, some branches in here that feed like pectoral muscles and muscles of the thorax. Those are not on your list, so we're not going to worry about them. There are also some branches that feed the muscles of the back and the sort of the region surrounding the scapula. And these guys we're not going to worry about. They all have scapular in the name though, which is kind of nice, so then you know exactly where they are. The roughest thing about the arteries of the arm is that they're going to change name a lot as we go down the arm. So it starts being called the subclavian, and then it's going to change its name to axillary as it goes through the axillary region. Axillary region, remember, is sort of the armpit. And one thing I am going to call your attention to while we're in this region is this guy right here. This is called the circumflex humeral artery. And anytime you see that word circumflex, it means wrapping. And if you look at this guy, this circumflex artery wraps all the way around that humerus. Visible body has it separated into an anterior and posterior branch. But anytime you see that word circumflex, that's what it means. It means that that artery, it wraps around something. From axillary, we move into the upper arm, and the name for the upper arm anatomically is brachial. And so then it becomes the brachial artery. Shortly after that sort of division from axillary into brachial, the brachial is going to divide into the profunda or deep brachial. Profunda brachii is the official name. Deep brachial is sort of that's like what it would translate out to. And if you think about that, deep brachial runs right along the bone. The brachial artery is going to run a little bit shallower. And both of these are taking blood down to the hand. You don't need to worry about the fact that this profunda brachii branches. One of the neat things, though, about its branches, I'll get to in just a minute. As we're going further down, that brachial artery is going to split. And it's going to split into a radial artery, which is going to go along the radius. And you can always remember, we talked in class about the idea of remembering radial as radical. I had another student that said ulna is under because you usually kind of rest your hand with your pinky down. So one branch goes down that radius, the other branch goes down the ulna. Whoops. Can highlight the bone. I can't really highlight the artery today. There we go. Other branch goes down the ulna. And if you look at that ulnar branch also has a branch that goes and feeds that interosseous layer. That's the layer between the bones that sort of keeps their distance. It's fibrous connective tissue. So the cool thing about this branch on the profunda brachii is that part of the profunda brachii comes down and loops up with this radial artery and actually does it. Whoops. Here, I'm just going to draw it because it's going to be easier for me to draw than it is going to be for me to click. It does it right here. The other part of that profunda brachii branches around and comes and connects up to the ulnar artery. So it's kind of fun because it creates like a little bit of an anastomosis, where if you had some kind of blockage, maybe here, if you had some kind of blockage here in your brachial artery, that blood would still have a different path to get to your lower arm through this profunda brachii. Now that's a pretty small artery, so you would not be getting nearly as much blood, but you're not going to lose your hand, or at least not as fast, so that's a good thing. All right, once we get down to the hand, we've got a couple fun things going on here. The big thing is these arches. And if you turn the hand ever so slightly, you'll notice one of those arches is deeper than the other. So the deep one is called the deep palmar arch. And then the shallow one is called the superficial palmar arch. Both of these are connecting that radius and ulna. So again, they're in anastomosis. So if the blood from the radial blood supply is blocked, blood from the ulnar blood supply will still be able to get to the fingers of the hand, and vice versa. So this is, again, a very good thing to keep blood going to your hand. The digital arteries that feed the fingers get their blood from these arches. All right, now let's look at those veins. So again, we have a couple structures to remove so that we can look at where they enter the heart. And I'm going to be doing this in reverse of the blood flow just because it's sort of easier doing things relative to the heart. The cool thing about veins is that everything is going to be symmetric. Unlike the heart, where we've got a brachiocephalic going to subclavian on one side and a subclavian on the other, here in the veins we always have a brachiocephalic going to a subclavian. All right, brachiocephalic is going to become the subclavian, and the subclavian, just like it did with the arteries, is going to become the axillary. And just like it did before, it's going to branch into the circumflex humeral, which just means something that wraps around. Now, in that axillary, you'll notice that there's a new branch. This is the cephalic vein, and the cephalic vein is actually really interesting because it runs the length of the arm, and it runs on the outside of the arm. So it runs towards the thumb. And I once had one of my students say that the easiest way that they had to remember this was that if you made a C with your hand, you would use your thumb, right? And then you could remember that the cephalic was on your thumb side. I thought that was pretty ingenious. Okay, so you've got this cephalic vein, and that's going to be a branch off of that axillary. As we go a little bit further down, now we have this brachial, which, just like it did with the arteries, is going to branch into a radial and an ulnar. And then we've got something else going on here. All right. Just where we split from the axillary into the brachial, we have this basilic vein. This is not something we had in the arteries. And basilic is like the opposite of the cephalic. It runs on the inside of the arm, so on the pinky side. And it's going to drain the arm that way. Now, my student who said, hey, if you make a C with your hand, you use your thumb, said if you make a sign language B, you're pointing at your pinky, and that's how you can remember that that's the basilic vein. Running between the cephalic and basilic right here is the cubital vein. And the cubital is the most noted place for blood draws. So if you ever become a phlebotomist, that's one of the places you're going to have to know about, or if you have to start like an IV line. Okay. And by the way, if you are looking for a vein to do a blood draw, that cubital is going to be more shallow than going for the brachial. So people are going to like you a little bit more if you go for cubital. Okay. Now, cephalic is going to branch off into an accessory cephalic. This guy goes off and does the top of the arm. And that basilic has a branch as well, because it just can't be easy, can it? And the branch on the basilic is interesting. It goes through the middle of the arm, and it's called the median antebrachial. Median because it goes through the middle of the arm, anti because it's the forearm, basically is what antebrachial means. All right, and then just once again, like you saw before, we have a deep and a superficial palmar arch. So we have a palmar venous arch that's superficial, and we have a deep palmar or a deep venous arch on the palm. Now there are more veins, of course. If anyone has done some time as a phlebotomist, you're probably familiar with some of these dorsal venous arches. That's a very common one to want to hit for an IV or something. That's also going to drain the hands. So basically any of those arches are going to drain those digital veins. That's going to drain into the radial, the ulnar, the median antebrachial, the cephalic, the basilic. And from there, radial and ulnar drain into brachial. Brachial and basilic drain into the axillary, and then cephalic drains into axillary just a little bit later than everybody else. And then they come back through the subclavian and back into the heart. So the veins on the arm are a little bit more difficult. This is where I would recommend like getting a pair of like pantyhose and stretching them over your arm and drawing the veins in and